Okay, so we've had our little break, and now we'll continue down here. We started to talk about prioritization, or this is where we are right now. Before we go a little bit further forward, does anybody have any thoughts or input that they want to put in, or questions or comments on what we've talked about so far today? Okay, we'll move forward. At the initiative horizon is where prioritization gets done. We've developed a list, or we're developing a list of high level components and a timeline for those components. One of the things about developing a timeline for components is prioritizing those components so that you understand what is important to be done when. And again, you can do this at various different levels of detail. You can start by saying, we have a list of very high-level features. These are our epics, and we want to, as a start, prioritize the epics. Say these are particular features that we want to develop. In what sort of timeline. You can group those from a technical perspective, and you want to be talking to your technical people. You can group those into components that will deliver those features. You may want to combine some of them. They may be all individual. It really depends. But in this initiative horizon is when those decisions start to be made, how things are going to be grouped and in what order things are going to be delivered. And you will then further be able to break this down into, we know what the features are, and let's start to talk about the individual pieces of the features, or the things that have to be done, not necessarily the individual tasks to deliver them, but you can break things down a little bit further, and then say for each of these groups of things that we have determined that we want to do, we can prioritize them. So you have a priority. You have a priority for the component. You have a priority for the features that are included in the component. And again, it becomes this iterative process of consistently basically going further and further detail as you need it in order to make appropriate decisions. Different aspects when you're trying to prioritize things. Things can be prioritized for any number of reasons or any number of ways, and sometimes you'll do them in combination. There are there's always a cost. If a particular feature or component is going to require significant amount of resources, either from the perspective of development resources or just physical resources, or for whatever reason, you can prioritize it based on those kinds of things. Ultimately, you want to be able to prioritize things such that you're delivering the maximum amount of value in the minimum amount of time. But there are a lot of things that go into that, and sometimes it's not all that clear. It may just be that you have to make a choice that says, you know what, here's something that we know that we can get out of the way quickly. Maybe it's not the most valuable component, but it's going to take us a little bit of time and effort, and so let's get it out of the way so that we don't have to consider it. So all of those things are part of it. Obviously, at the initiative horizon, you want to have a lot of communication between your business people and your technical people, so that decisions aren't made based on just one perspective. And obviously, if there are any constraints, constraints can be anything. It can be availability of development resources, availability of cash money if things need to be, purchased. All of those kinds of things can be constraints, or things that will get in the way of being able to do this. And it's your job at this particular horizon is to build the best possible picture for you to move forward to at least get started on things. And obviously you're going to continue to look at this and continue to refine it as you go further forward, so that as you accomplish things, you may change your priorities. As changes happen in the environment, your priorities may change. So you always need to be ready and willing and able to reprioritize. This is an area actually where when you're operating in the non-agile environment, things don't tend to happen. Prioritization doesn't get done. I can remember, dealing with situations where we were doing a lot of predictive analysis, trying to get all of our requirements up front, and there was never any appetite to address, well, what's the most important thing, or what are the least important things amongst these requirements. It was everything is critical, everything has to be delivered. In the agile environment, it's a lot easier to say, well, we're going to consider this. We know that this is the most important thing for us to do right now. Other things are less important, and that just means that we're deferring a decision on ultimately whether or not we're going to deliver this this last user story, this last requirement. We don't need to make that decision right now. We've prioritized it off the table for the time being. We can always come back and address it and say, yes, we've determined that now at this particular point in time, this is critical for us to have. So it's a very flexible process, and it's supported well in the agile environment, less well in the predictive environment, where people are always saying, well, we've got to get it into the contract. If it's in the contract, we have to deliver it, and if we're not going to deliver it for some reason, then we have to go back and fight about whether or not we're going to deliver it. Continual reprioritization, that's what I've been talking about. Every time we do something, we should look at how does that impact everything else that we've done or everything else that we have to do, and continually make decisions based on what we've done. Key core concept in terms of doing agile delivery is that it's always flexible. This is going back to answering the question that I said we should always be asking, which is, how do we know when we're done? How do we know if we've achieved what we need to achieve? And by continually addressing these things, by continually looking at what we've done and what the outcome has been of what we've done, we can go back and say at a higher level, are we finished? Have we satisfied the need? Have we satisfied an initial small need, or have we satisfied a bigger need? And this permeates the entire process. So that at every level you're talking about what have we done and do we need to do more? And the bit of a key here is that this is where your product owner comes into play, in that the product owner is the person who is authorized to make decisions about the product and the process, as a representative, as the overall representative of the business. In the DSDM framework, that person is known as the product visionary, and it's a position that is generally less senior, less executive than a project sponsor, because this is a person who needs to be hands-on and involved regularly and consistently. And so while they have the authority to make decisions, they also have a kind of a broad responsibility to the project that perhaps a sponsor would not have the time or necessarily even the expertise to be able to do. So this there needs to be a person who is responsible for this. Obviously that person can and should consult with other people about it, but ultimately it comes down to that this is the person who is accountable for making decisions as to when we stop and when we continue, and making decisions that say at this particular point in time we need to request more resources. I need to go back to my sponsor and say we need more resources because we haven't satisfied all our needs, and we as a team have said this is what we need to satisfy all of our needs. Should be done every time you make a delivery. Every time you make a delivery, you should be looking at it and saying, okay, what did this delivery do for us? Do we have more work to do around this, or are we finished? The viability of the solution. Is the solution still going to continue to work? And this is why Agile development is so critical, because Agile development, unlike predictive development, says we can continually assess what's going on with our product, and we do have the right and the obligation to say at a particular point in time, this solution doesn't work, this solution is not working, or this solution works. And we make decisions based on that assessment. If we have a solution that simply doesn't work, it doesn't make sense to continue to pour resources into that solution. If we have a solution that we honestly believe is not working currently but could be made to work, then it's worth looking at it and saying, let's continue to dedicate resources to this, because we will achieve the outcome we're looking for, but we haven't achieved it yet. And then obviously if we've already achieved the outcome, we can say we have achieved the outcome that we wanted to, and so in that sense it's also viable to say it's time to stop. We don't want to dedicate any more resources because we've achieved the outcome that we intended to achieve. These are possible options. I've already kind of addressed most of these. You can change the solution, you can change the schedule, or you can cancel the initiative. No magic there. In general, the initiative horizon time frame is going to be shorter than the strategy time frame. They give there are kind of high-level estimates of what that should be, depending on what your delivery horizon is. If your delivery horizon operates along most of the agile frameworks, you're talking about something like 1 to 4, at the outside 6 weeks for an iteration, and your initiative horizon wants to encompass a number of different iterations, one or more different iterations. So it could be as little as a month or so, but it could be several months, as opposed to the strategy horizon, which is probably more in the looked at in terms of quarters and years, although it doesn't have to be. I mean, it can be a shorter time horizon, but this is in general the way it works. It's as you have more detail, as you go into more detail on these things, you're talking about a tighter time frame, and that kind of goes across the spectrum. Strategy is longer than horizon, which is longer than delivery. The other thing about this is that, again, this is a flexible process, and it's a continual and continuous process, so that it's not, well, here's the initiative for the next 3 months. Here's the initiative for the next 3 months, but we don't start talking about the next initiative 3 months later. We're constantly talking about the initiative, but we're always talking about it in the context of a 1 to 3 month window. So we're talking about, this is what we're talking about for the next 3 months. And then next month we start talking about what we're going to talk about for the next 3 months. So it's continually shifting and rolling. That is also true of the other two horizons. Every time we readdress it, we look at it and say, okay, here's our position. Our strategy timeline generally takes us forward 6 months. So every month we're going to review our strategy position for the next 6 months. We have an overall goal for the next 6 months, but every month we're going to address that to see if we're still working correctly towards meeting that goal. That's the way all of this tends to work. Issues that we're looking at the initiative horizon. We're always going to have multiple initiatives, or in most environments we're going to have multiple initiatives going on at the same time, and one of the keys to all of this is making sure that we're looking at things holistically. So it's not just where is my initiative going, but it's also where is my initiative going in the context of all the initiatives that are currently in play, and how does my initiative mesh or blend with other initiatives. The circumstance that Javed was talking about earlier, where they have 3 application development teams operating on different platforms, but for any given higher level initiative, it may involve one or more of those platforms, one more or all of those platforms, and those kind of pieces need to be put together so that you have a holistic view of the high-level initiative, but under that each stream has its own initiative that they're working on, and this just needs to be coordinated at that level. Ultimately, what we're coming out of here, one of the things we're coming out of this is a roadmap, a solution roadmap, product roadmap, so that we can see what's going on, what's gone on, and what will be going on. From the delivery horizon, we're always looking for detailed information, more detailed information on how this is all fitting together as we deliver the pieces. We want to see how the picture starts to come together, so that it's kind of like putting together a puzzle. The delivery horizon represents the pieces in the puzzle, and as we as we do different areas in the puzzle, we'll see different parts of the puzzle picture start to come together. We'll start to be able to recognize different parts of the puzzle, and then ultimately, when we get everything done, we'll have the whole puzzle put together. And then that makes an interesting paradigm for doing this development kind of thing. A good paradigm, because you have different small chunks, and until you start to get those chunks aligned, it's sometimes difficult to actually see the overall picture of things. Extending that just a little bit, if any of you have done puzzles, frequently what you wind up doing is saying, okay, I've got all of these pieces. Where's the easiest place for me to start? The easiest place for me to start is with the borders of the puzzle, so that I can identify those pieces that have flat sides or corners, and I can put those in place and start to mesh those together, so that I get basically my border, my outline, my context in place. And then I start working at the middle, and I can start working at the middle by looking at the picture and identifying individual pieces, or I can break it into smaller chunks and say, let me work on this corner. If I have a landscape puzzle, I'm going to say, okay, well, let me look at the sky. Let me start to work with the sky pieces and find all of those pieces that are relevant to the sky, and start to put them together, and then pick another piece of the puzzle, or if I have a flower in the middle of my puzzle, I can say, let me, focus on the blooms of the flower. So I'm breaking it down into smaller pieces and putting all those smaller pieces together to build me a bigger picture. Feedback and learning. We always want to be, it's, as a part of Agile development, we're always supposed to be adapting and improving, looking at things and saying, okay, are we doing things right? Do we need to change things? And the one caution there is we should be making an assessment that says there's a valid reason why we want to do this differently. The reason we're making a change is because something is not operating successfully, not just that we're in an adaptive process that means we need to change. If we're doing things right and we don't feel there's any real reason or need to change, then we should keep doing things the way we've been doing them. Obviously, we've learned our lessons and we're in good shape. It's only when we find that things are not operating optimally or up to our standards that we want to be able to change. And we want to do this, also look at doing this in a sort of holistic manner and in a controlled manner. Don't want to jump off the deep end and change up everything. And agile development offers us the opportunity to break things down into continually smaller and smaller chunks so that we can learn something about the small chunks and not risk having to make major changes midstream. I mentioned this previously that at the initiative horizon, we're feeding back to the strategy horizon. We've always got multiple things going on, and so all of those things combine they impact each other and they also impact strategy. So we've got a lot of moving parts that are meshed together, and each one of those initiatives will feed back to the strategy. It will also feed back to the other initiatives that are going on, as long as there's some relationship between them. And I would probably argue in a development environment there's always going to be a relationship between initiatives. Even in the context of something like Javed's environment where there are multiple independent application streams, there's always going to be some sort of tie between those streams, whether it's at the super high level of somebody is controlling the corporate budget and the corporate budget needs to be allocated to those development streams. Well, if there's 3 development streams, there's 3 pieces of the budget that have to be considered at some level, even if that's a strategic decision that happens once a year or once every couple of years. There still is there's a possibility that one of those platforms, one of those development streams, could impact the other 2 streams at some point. This is just the nature of the beast, and it's the way things happen. The principles of Agile business analysis in terms of the initiative horizon. Seeing the whole. What does that mean? Well, it's looking at this in the context of both the strategy and delivery horizons. The initiative horizon doesn't operate in a vacuum. It's looking at things in terms of the pieces that the initiative horizon is delivering. How are each of those pieces tying together to deal with an overall strategic need? And the last bullet, determining if a need has been satisfied, even if all the solution components haven't been delivered, so that we can say, okay, this particular piece of the puzzle is completed. We still have a lot more of the puzzle to go, but we can at least make a decision that this has been completed, and obviously can make a decision that says, by completing this, have we basically mitigated the need to continue forward. Do we have enough? Are we getting enough value from what we've done in order to basically cancel the rest of the project? Thinking as a customer, this is particularly key in terms of prioritizing, trying to understand what the customer, and by the customer I mean whoever is going to be using this, what will they find the most valuable, focusing on that. Certainly have been in an environment where working with business users on their process, business users tend to think in terms of exceptions frequently. It's like, what's the most important thing? Well, the most important thing is the one that gives me the most problem during the day. And then saying, well, wait a minute, let's talk about this, because isn't it really that the most important thing is the thing that's going to allow you to get the most work done in the least amount of time, making your process efficient. So perhaps where you need to focus is on the 80% of the work that you're doing, as opposed to the 20% exceptions. And I obviously, in my experience, have had situations where we've talked to business users and they've said, oh, this is critical. We need to solve this. This problem needs to be solved because it's the biggest problem that we face in terms of doing our jobs. And I said, how often does this problem occur? And they said, oh, once every couple of months. And I said, well, do you think maybe we should be solving the problems that happen every day and not worrying quite so much about the one that happens once every 3 months? Oh yeah, this is not an uncommon thing for business users, because when things are going smoothly, when everything is running, the way you expect it to run, you kind of just go on automatic pilot. You just keep doing what you've been doing, and not realizing that if I spend a little bit of time making the 80% of your job that you do every day, all the time, if I spend a little bit of time making that just a little bit more efficient, that will actually overall, as an organization, derive more value than if I spend a lot of time on the thing that you don't do very often. That causes you a great deal of problem. That's just competitive kind of thing. Saw an interesting post actually it was on LinkedIn yesterday, and it was the choice was, if you were given a choice, what would you prefer to have, $1 million or a penny that was going to double its value every day? And my gut feeling was it was probably going to be the penny. So I looked at the numbers, and it turns out that if you took the penny in 30 days, you would have somewhere between, I don't know whether it was $35 million or $350 million, but it was a huge number that you would, by just focusing on the penny versus the $1 million, you would never make that choice. But if you delve into it and say, where am I actually going to derive more value, you come to the conclusion that the non-obvious choice is the place to go. The same thing is true when you're making decisions about a solution. You have to be in tune with the overall process, the overall solution that you're trying to deliver, and how each component delivers value, so that you can make a valid judgment that says, here is where I need to focus my efforts at this particular point in time. That's also true of sequencing. You want to be delivering the piece of your solution that will give the greatest perceived value to the customer in the shortest amount of time. And I say, I emphasize perceived value because frequently, coming from the outside as a solution developer, your perception of value is not going to be the same as the person who is using it. And I want to add the caveat here that their perception of value may not be the actual value. But if you're dealing with a client, you're dealing with delivering a solution to somebody, you need to be mindful of their opinion of what is going to be valuable, because they're the ones that are ultimately paying the bill. Now, as a good business analyst, you want to develop supporting materials so that if you have a client or a customer that says, well, this is what's the most valuable to me, you can gently, and I emphasize gently, you can say, well, okay, look, I've run the numbers and it doesn't appear that way to me. So can you help me understand why why you believe this is a more valuable option? And these are things that BAs go through all the time. It's one of the things that makes a BA's life interesting and stressful at some points. But there are things you have to consider. So you want to be delivering value, but you want to be delivering perceived value. Thinking as a customer also implies that you want to be talking to your customers. You want to be engaging in communication with them so that you're getting their feedback, their opinion on what you've delivered. If you're delivering things, if you're consistently delivering things and working with your stakeholders, presumably you will be sort of forced to think as a customer if they're responding to what you do, and they're on the hook to respond to what you do, and you expect them to respond to what you're doing. Ultimately, you're going to wind up coming to a situation where you really start to think and act like them, and that's a good thing. It's valuable for you to be able to put yourself in their shoes. Analyze to determine what's valuable. Here again, you're talking about being able to have a shared understanding across the people who are building this solution and the people who are going to be using this solution, so that you're all thinking along the same lines. And if you're always asking the question as you're going through that thought process, if you're asking, what is valuable about this? What value is this particular piece of the component adding? Then you will be analyzing what you're doing to determine what's valuable, and using that to inform the decisions that you make at this level again, because this level is about priority and sequence, so that you want to be maximizing the value that you can deliver. Interesting bullet here is identifying solution components that don't contribute directly to the desired outcome. There are some things, we'll see this in terms of avoiding waste. There are things that you simply have to do that don't add perceived value. They can be, intangibles. They can be practical kinds of things where value is added differently than perhaps a dollars and cents perception of value. In a regulatory environment, complying with regulations is a valuable thing. If you're in a regulatory environment, a regulated environment, and you don't comply with the regulations, you may not be operating for very long, or you may be wasting money basically mitigating not complying with those things. So in terms of your products and your processes, while those things may not be directly valuable to your direct customers, there is value to the organization in those things. So value is different things to different people. In an organization, obviously, if you're in the compliance or legal department, what's valuable to you is not necessarily going to be what's valuable to the marketing people. And those things are all things that you need to consider as a part of the team that's developing or producing a solution. Get real using examples. We've seen this, we've seen this statement. I said we were going to see this statement, and we've seen this statement of a shared understanding in so many different contexts, and it really is a critical piece to being able to develop, certainly in an agile environment. Getting everybody on the same page, whether that's getting everybody on the same page with the terminology that you're using, or getting everybody on the same page with the prioritization that you've established. It's all about getting the team thinking as a team. Get real using examples. This starts to talk about developing scenarios. I mentioned this a little bit earlier in the sense of what do you do 80% of the time versus what do you do the other 20% of the time. And this bullet emphasizes that you want to get to the things that are going to add the most value in the shortest amount of time, and those are generally the things that you do all the time. The common scenarios are what to be concerned about. Not that you should ignore the other scenarios. You need to consider those scenarios, but you can prioritize those scenarios. You can say, okay, this is, we know that this is the 80% scenario, and it's just one scenario. We should focus on handling that, but we should be continuously identifying other possible scenarios, so that once we have that baseline of this is the way we do things most often, you can start to look at those other scenarios. That becomes an interesting balancing act, because the one thing that you don't want to do is to back yourself into a corner to say, I'm taking care of my most common scenario, and I haven't thought of anything else, and somehow I've backed myself into a corner that when a different scenario comes up, I say, well, we just can't do that. That's going to cause yourself a problem. Sometimes it's unavoidable. Sometimes it just turns out that there are things that you can't do given the solution choices that you've made. You want to minimize those, but at the same time, you don't want to spend inordinate amounts of time saying, I could build a solution that could do anything for anybody anytime they want it. This is, again, how much of my resources do I dedicate? Understanding what's doable. If you understand your constraints, then you are most of the way towards being able to avoid saying that you're going to try and do something that you can't possibly do. And this is also critical to getting feedback from your delivery horizon. Collaboration is, you're going to see this, and it's always there. It's, it also helps to make being a part of a project and part of an organization worthwhile. If you're stuck off in a corner doing your own thing and doing it by yourself, and not basically working with other people towards some sort of larger, more holistic goal, I would argue that it's going to be a less satisfying experience for you. And so this is emphasizing in particular context of doing project work and delivering solutions for an organization, that you really want to be in a situation of delivering an organization that the people are going to, or delivering a solution that the people who need to use it are going to appreciate, so that they will appreciate your efforts, and that's fostered by collaboration. by interfacing with people, by communicating with people. And you always want to be improving. You want to be looking at things. This is an overriding theme that has permeated this discussion thus far. Always want to be looking for ways to do things better, and recognizing if you are doing things where there's not a way to do them better. On agile teams, it's just this is what it's all about. It's about on an agile team you have various different resources, and the whole idea of the agile team is to be working together to be continually improving, continually doing what's right and what's better for the organization. At the initiative horizon, again, we're making decisions about the priorities and the sequence of things, and this can't be done in a vacuum. It can't be one person, no matter who that person is, making those decisions independent of any input from other people. The product owner may be responsible ultimately for the prioritization of what's going to be done, but that needs to be informed by information from the other horizons and from the other people who are involved in the situation. Product owner can only make decisions independently. They can make decisions based on their knowledge and their information, but I would argue that without input and information from other people, they're not going to be guaranteed to make the correct decision. There's always going to be things that they don't know about. Retrospectives fit into this very well. Again, retrospectives about reviewing things and saying, well, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? How can we change it? Should we change it? When will we change it? If we don't stop to take a look at what we've done and what the results were, then we're avoiding this whole continuous improvement possibility. And if we don't talk to each other about it, we're certainly not collaborating. So retrospectives are an important part of being able to do agile development. Avoid waste. This is combining, we talked about understanding what was doable. I mentioned that we were probably going to see this in terms of waste, and those two things tie together. It's a matter of detail at the initiative level, understanding what features we can provide, what we can do at what point in time, what we have resources available to do, what we have capability available to do in the organization, and then saying let's not go down any paths that are not indicated by what we're capable of and what resources we have. The more information and the better information you have, the easier it's going to be to avoid waste. It's, as this graphic on the side of the slide indicates, it's about informed decision making. If we have the right information, we can make the right decisions. If we don't have the right information, it's highly likely that we're not going to make the right decisions at some point. When do we avoid waste? Well, we avoid it when we have a shared understanding. What are we going to be doing and what are we not going to be doing in order to get our requested outcome? When we decide that we're marching down the wrong road, let's cut our losses. This is something that a lot of organizations are very reluctant to do. They're very reluctant to admit that they've made a mistake. People in general tend to be reluctant to admit that they've made a mistake, and rather than basically biting the bullet and saying, you know what, this was the wrong thing to do, let me stop now, there's always the, well, but if I just go a little bit further, maybe it will turn out that this was not the wrong decision to make. it will turn out that I haven't wasted all of my time and money if I just keep going. And that's a very dangerous place to be. It's something that agile, the concept of doing things agilely, in a way that we're taking short steps, a lot of short steps in rapid succession, allows us to gently say to ourselves, we've taken enough steps, we need to stop taking steps here. I guess at some point you get to the point where you've committed yourself and you've committed your entire organization and everything to a particular initiative or to a particular piece of an initiative, and it becomes somewhat impossible to drop off. But the idea of agile solution development is intended to mitigate that as much as possible. When have we done enough? Well, this goes back to my whole premise of if we don't know what we're trying to achieve, then we don't know when we've achieved it. This is one where people fail all the time. And this is at the initiative horizon. How do we know if we need more features if we don't know what value the features that we've already produced are providing, and we don't know what value we were trying to achieve strategically at a higher level? We're going to be in a position where we're not going to be able to make that decision because we've just simply not gathered the appropriate amount of information in order to make an informed decision, and so we're kind of stuck. That kind of takes us to the end of the slide presentation for this particular thing. It's 11:45. We've got about an hour and 15 minutes. It's 11:45 my time. We've got about an hour and 15 minutes left to go. I'm going to switch over into going from the study guide to look at some of the detail in there, some of the techniques on this. I'm going to suggest that we take, like at this point in time, maybe a 10-minute break, and then come back. It would be 52 minutes, 8 minutes before the hour. So thank you all, and I will see you in about 10 minutes.